Hello, everyone, and welcome back to OWL by the Numbers, your one-stop spot for all things Fantasy Overwatch League. I am your host, Terminally Drunk, and tonight on episode 42, we're going to take a look back at the introduction of hero pools to the Overwatch League and how that had impacted our Fantasy Overwatch League weeks. We'll let you know which heroes are going to be in play, and potentially what sort of compositions we'll see for the week ahead, so you guys can get your unlimited draft lineup set. And of course, we're here to talk about some of the marquee matches as well. So before we jump into the agenda for tonight and introduce you to my co-host, let me just quickly take a moment to thank everyone who is joining us tonight on Twitch for our live show. And of course, I have to thank all of our repeat listeners out there. So as you can tell, we got a little bit of a smaller crew tonight. Bob is out. Ed is still on vacation. But you know what? We got the dynamic duo, the team that basically ran the show for the Podcasters Fantasy Showdown this past season. So joining me tonight...
We would be running the show again if we could get the stats on time, too.
That is also true. We do have delayed stats. More on that in just a second. But joining me, as you can tell, is Ramses. Ramses, how's the past week been treating you, man?
It's been all right. Happy to be part of the skeleton crew for tonight. I feel like we might actually end on time for the first time ever. But fantasy was all right. So for any of our listeners who are using Fantasy Owl, I learned a lesson that apparently everybody else knew before I did, even though it was an issue that only selectively happens to certain people. So for Fantasy Owl, for the daily Overwatch fantasy stuff, I got hit with an issue where I was going in to put my lineup in on Saturday morning, like at 8 a.m., and somehow through my app, it had re-added all the Chinese games. So it had re-added all the Chinese games and all the Chinese players. And so because of that, it ran that our host league was I couldn't get in. It ran that it wouldn't let me in, even though technically I wasn't putting in any players who had actually played yet. So talk to Fal about that. Apparently, that was just a user by user thing. Some people had it, some people didn't. I immediately made sure to get in my Sunday lineups. But yeah, so I would imagine, just in case, try and get your Saturday daily fantasy stuff in by maybe Friday night at the latest, just to be 100% sure.
Well, correct me if I'm wrong, Ramses, but didn't I even get our daily stuff up a couple of days earlier than normal?
No, none of this is you. This is 100% me. Because you got it up on Thursday or Wednesday. I think you got it up pretty early, but no, it's 100% on me. I blame nobody but myself. But this is what we learned. Because you even saw some banter from, I think, the Gladiators and the Vancouver Titans, or maybe it was Soul about how oh man, I can't wait to play our game this weekend. I can't wait to play our game. I thought for a sliver of a second maybe I was gonna make it, but alas, homestand bans continue for an extra week. But speaking of bans, we have some other things to talk about. We got our first week of hero pool action with the initial hero bans of McCree, Widowmaker, Reinhardt, and Moira. And, I think we saw people react in two different camps, right? We had people who were like, this is awesome. The chaos of this is all these new comps is super fun to watch. And then you had other people who were very oh, this is too chaotic. It's too random, too RNG. It ruins the game. I don't like it. So I think between those two camps, Totem, what was your experience watching the games this weekend?
I actually, I caught most of the stuff later than I would have liked to because it was a pretty busy weekend. For me though, it's more in line of, with the introduction of hero pools, we're in a situation now where these teams are really only getting a couple days worth of practice as opposed to what they were getting prior with the other metas. And I know a lot of people have kind of been calling that out, where they feel like the competitive integrity has kind of been shot. And I thought the matches were very entertaining. We saw a lot of different heroes in play. We basically saw every single support hero that wasn't banned in play. We got to see a lot of variations in regards to the tanks. We got to see a lot of Soldier 76, but that's kind of gonna change. Feels bad, man. Lex comes out for 1
Unfortunate.
week, and then we gotta take him away. So
Immediate ban for the legs.
But I will say, I was a little bit surprised by the lack of Pharah, given the fact that, McCree and Widow was out. But, with so many people running Soldier this past week, I mean, I can kind of understand, but it's not as hard of a counter when you compare it to the other hit scan heroes.
You would have thought that we would have seen some Pharah, but no Pharah this weekend. We saw a lot of McCree, like you said, and then, sorry, not McCree. We saw a lot of Soldier, like you said, and then it kind of felt like it was a team-by-team basis because most teams were running the Soldier with some, like, I know Florida and Paris ran the May for a little bit.
Mm-hmm.
I think Paris even ran May Tracer for a little bit, and then I went to Soldier Tracer. Tracer actually, by the way, got a lot of play this weekend. I know Corey bring out the Tracer. Totem, I can't tell you how happy I was to watch Dante obliterate people on Tracer this weekend. It made my heart feel so good. But a little bit of Tracer there. We saw some Doomfist too. I think at that point, that's where you start going to more of the comfort pick heroes, where if with that little time to prepare, you're going to the hero that you're going to have an impact with.
Mm-hmm.
So, it kind of puts the stats all up in the air because some teams we didn't really see that big of a fluctuation in stats, and then I think some other teams kind of fell a little bit just because some players weren't getting the same, like, a number of final blows or just pure damage even.
Right, and, it was interesting to see just the different compositions we were seeing on a day-to-day basis for those teams that were playing twice. Probably the most notable one being Paris, who that first day got absolutely crapped on by Houston, who had an awesome performance that day. More on that later, because that was definitely an upset. But Paris came out against Philadelphia with a vengeance, which was like a complete 180 when you compare the two. It was like a night and day differential. So, it didn't work one day. Next day, they kind of swapped up what they were running in regards to the strategies. And, it's interesting to see, like, are these teams going to be able to find what they feel like is the perfected meta, early on and then just kind of coast through that? Or is it going to be a lot of teams just going towards what they feel are going to be comfort picks that are going to be more in their wheelhouse given the available hero pool at the time? Because we got a healthy mixture of the two this past week, but there were definitely some teams that looked a lot cleaner on dive as opposed to others, and then you had other teams that were more like bunker oriented, where they were playing like double barrier with the Orisa and the Sigma, and then they were usually keeping a Soldier behind those barriers, and that was getting a lot of the damage output there.
We even saw, I think, a little bit more Torb this weekend as well. Granted, I know that's kind of like the Atlanta pick, but we saw a little bit of Torb come out, and I think we might see him a little bit more this weekend with the incoming bans. It really just, I think the thing I'm more concerned with hero pools, as I'm realizing, is that I feel like we're just going to have alternating comps every week, where instead of like varied comps throughout the season, until we get a significant patch, it feels like we're going to see like McCree, May, Ryan, well, no D.Va this time. Oh, so yeah, McCree, May, Ryan, D.Va, Lucio, whatever two supports, and then the week off, and then that comp again. Like, I know that there's going to be random drawings, but the fact that the drawings aren't weighted, it doesn't really give me any sort of confidence, really. Like, I know it was a meme, but somebody put up a tweet that was like, the competitive integrity of our game comes down to Sideshow blindfolded with a bingo drawer. Like, we'll see what goes forward. We should probably talk about the incoming bans for this next week, because we have a whole new crop of heroes, and we already mentioned Soldier being banned, but we have 3 more to talk about as well.
Absolutely. And, on the note of, like, the weighted picks, too, I know a lot of people have been kind of, like, keeping an eye on that. And I feel like if we are going to get alternating, like, rotations in regards to, like, what meta is getting swapped in and out, it's basically going to depend on how many heroes are going to be above that 10% threshold that makes them eligible to get picked out of the pool. So outside of Soldier, the other DPS that was banned for this upcoming week is Sombra. So we've seen a lot of teams running like Sombra Tracer Dive, and that seemed to be pretty much one of the go-to strats for a lot of the teams this past week. In regards to the tank ban, we have Winston out of play. So, we're probably
Bad
expecting
times.
a lot of Reinhardt and Diva, similar to what we were seeing in, basically the first month of the Overwatch League. Then for support, we have Lucio. So that's definitely the most interesting one to me. So this past week, we saw a lot of different variations. A lot of Brigida was getting played, and part of that was due to the sheer amount of dive that we got to see. We got to see a good amount of Zenyatta coming into play, so a lot of teams making use out of that Discord orb. But not having that speed boost could definitely make things interesting, but it does make teams pretty susceptible to, getting isolated from, like, the Mei ice wall. So I don't really expect too many iterations outside of what we have come to expect with the McCree, the Mei, as, like, the primary DPS duo.
I think we're just going to go back to McCree, Mei, Ryan, Diva, and I think we're going to just see Ana Brigida be like just the standard support comp for this weekend. I know people have put forward the idea that like we could see a little bit more bunker just because you don't have the speed to kind of rush through people. So we could see the teams that are more confident running double shield definitely could pull that. But you look at all these, I would say maybe with the exception of like Toronto, most of these teams have a pretty decent. The teams this weekend at least are going to have a pretty decent version of the comp you've been seeing.
Right.
So,
it definitely, I think, impacts Toronto the most, just knowing how much they've been relying on the dive composition. So, we've been seeing like a weird mixture of teams running like double barrier and then the Rhine Diva. And Toronto's been one that kind of keeps switching things up quite a bit. So I don't know if we should expect them to come out with a double barrier again, knowing that it hasn't really worked that well. Then again, Toronto is kind of free-falling at this point. Their stock has definitely been down, despite, the veteran experience that they have, especially on stage at this point.
Well, and the thing with Toronto, unfortunately, is that it seemed, I think, I'm trying to remember who made the comparison. It might have been Sideshow or it might have been Bren, that Toronto's the kind of team where once you figure them out, they do well until you kind of learn how they play, and then from there they're kind of predictable. And you could make that claim, I would say, definitely like with Agility's and Beast's style of play. Same with Logic's, where you kind of know where the weak points in their game are. Beast has looked hit or miss on the Rhine. There's been times where he's gotten some really good stratters, and there's times where he's gotten kind of bullied away. And I think this is we've seen them do this the last couple of weeks. I think they're going to go back to just putting everything in the Surefour basket and hoping Surefour, Kariv, and Nevix can carry them into a win this week, which, looking at their schedule, is doable. Washington's far from unbeatable, but I think Toronto goes down a little bit. I've been wondering. I mean, Boston's going to be crap, I think, no matter what. I've been wondering personally how much this is going to impact Paris, simply just because they are no longer going to have FD God on the Lucio. And we know how important that guy has been to their game plan. I think it's 1 week and they're playing Florida, so it's not the biggest injury, but I'm just curious.
Yeah, not having the aggro Lucio could definitely come into play, but I would expect he'll probably be coming in on the Baptiste at this point. So I don't expect really like the damage output or the healing throughput to really see too much of a step down. Plus, you get Exi more back to a comfort pick, because we got to see him play quite a few roles that we just haven't quite seen from him this past week, and he looked. I wouldn't say fantastic. I would say he was adequate. Stats-wise, he was kind of like middle of the pack. But unfortunately, we're still waiting on everything to come through on some of the platforms. So we can't really tell right now unless we actually have the stats lab up. But there were a lot of people this past week that kind of stepped in that was a little bit of a surprise. And, one of them was actually a recent sign-in by the Boston Uprising. So they went out and they picked up Halo, who is a main support player. And Halo basically comes in and immediately starts over Swimmer, primarily on that Lucio role.
Poor Swimmer.
And then outside of that, you also have Fusions, who went back into the starting role as a main tank, and that's because that Axiom is on a leave of absence, so we don't quite know when he's going to be back, but, that's definitely a pretty big shakeup. Now, Fusions has definitely been pretty red, I would say, on his Reinhardt, especially after the early go-ins and the early success that he had this past season, but a lot of teams caught on to his playstyle pretty quick, so I'm very worried about what this is going to mean for Boston moving forward, knowing that, the main tank position felt like it was more of a lock with Axiom in, and, right now we just don't know what the situation is going to be for them moving forward. But I will say, I was impressed with the play that we did see out of Halo. But, man, you got to feel bad for a swimmer. A rookie coming into the league this year, gets a couple of starts, and already finds himself on the bench. So we'll see how competitive they're going to be in that regard. But I will say, Halo definitely felt like he had the better Lucio. Maybe they'll play swimmer in situations that calls for a Mercy that it just remains to be seen at this point. But we haven't really been seeing a ton of Mercy play either, so that kind of puts Swimmer on the outside of looking in at this point.
Well, looking at Boston, unfortunately, the thing that's kind of is frustrating with these guys is I think we could see bigger scores from almost everybody on this team. I think the only person we feel confident with is Myeonbong, but I feel bad for Swimmer, of course. I don't think he was necessarily the weak point in Boston, but granted, he wasn't a strong point for them either. I'm just trying to figure out. I think this is the thing that we have started to do with Huck and the Boston Uprising signing strategies is you're trying to see the brain behind it. You're trying to see what the ultimate motive is, and it's not like you can call this how Persia and Aim God went last year, right? Or how Nevix and Neko and Aim God went the year before, where you have a guy who we know is good, and then you're bringing in somebody to back him up while you sell the top guy. So, I mean, all happy for Halo to be in the league. It is really funny that his official league photo is just a picture of Color Hex with Halo's head photoshopped on top of it. I thought that was hilarious and also, I don't know if you've seen this from a couple teams where, I think it happens with Paris especially, where Paris, where teams where if they don't have the correct jersey for a player, they're wearing a jacket or they're wearing something to cover up their jersey, so you can't obviously see it's not their jersey. And then for Halo, it's just an entire different picture. Before I forget, speaking of role swaps, did anybody else laugh when Philly started their Sunday game and they had EQO back on the Brigitte again?
Oh, when I saw that, my heart sank. I was like, oh, here we go again. He's going to come out looking pissed off on stage.
I started laughing so freaking hard. I couldn't.
You can never escape Brig Drill.
The man finally gets... Nope, never mind, you're back. Oh, poor guy. So, and then Fusion looked better once they put Funny Astro in on the Brig. So, I think they're going to run with that going forward. The other person we saw really kind of make their debut this weekend was Edison for the Atlanta Reign, formerly, forgive me if I'm wrong, but I'm formerly with Meta Athena.
I believe so. No, wait, hold on. Edison was GC Busan Wave, if I'm not mistaken.
GC Busan Wave. So one of the more hyped DPS, especially Flex DPS coming out of Contenders Korea, and I would say, for as much as he could, I think he definitely delivered this weekend. In his one game, his OWL debut, 74 elims, 41 final blows, 11 deaths, and 18.5 damage. So really good stats. He enters a situation where we know Ursa's going to be safe. He enters a situation where do we think whether he becomes just the situational pick over Baby Bay, in hero pools, or if he moves full time into that hit scan role as well, because we know we can play hit scan to a very high level as well.
Yeah, and just knowing that Baby Bay had technically already been getting a start on those major hit scan characters so far doesn't really bode well for my confidence that Edison will get the nod in situations where we don't see double hit scan bans. So I would say err on the side of caution. I would probably put my money on Baby Bay getting the start. Whether it is him coming out on control, running the Torbjorn to keep the meme dream alive on that end. But as long as McCree is in play, I would expect Baby Bait to get the nod there. But, I thought it was funny that Atlanta was like, oh yeah, we're just wait until you see what we unleash. Or it was like something along those lines. And then you're looking at it and like, wait, aren't Atlanta playing Boston? Like, of course you're going to have a good game.
I mean, unless you're Houston. That definitely, I think, needs to be remembered. And Atlanta's looked just as iffy as last year, where there are times where when they scope you out, they are deadly. And then if they don't have you 100% planned out, it's a way tighter game. What is nice is that we know that Atlanta finally has a strong duo now for the Hanzo May pick, or for the Genji May pick, or Tracer Genji. So I think Edison fills up any sort of holes they had in their offense, and we still know Sharp is back there, which I feel bad if I'm Sharp now because I think I'm the third best Tracer apparently on this roster. Which is it's hilarious, man. We saw that this weekend, 2 weekends ago with Atlanta versus Paris, where Urster can go to the pocket Tracer and just completely win over a fight. So I want to see Sharp in there at some point. Maybe fantasy owners don't, but I think Edison's going to slowly creep in. I wouldn't give it 100%, but I think he's slowly going to creep in.
Yeah, it could just come down to who has a hot hand in the given week based off of scrim results and whatnot. And on a Tracer note, I will say, seeing the amount of Zenyatta and Tracer and Brigitte this past week was pretty interesting. Especially when we were seeing a lot of the armor packs being put on the Tracers along with the Harmony Orb, and just seeing the amount of havoc on the backline that kind of ensued from that. But, if we're talking about chaotic things that happened, there was a moment in that Houston-Paris game on Eichenwald specifically where I just shook my head. I was like, oh my God, what are you doing, Paris? So, you have Muma, who is on Winston.
Oh, this is awesome.
And he's well beyond the first point. Basically on the high ground leading towards the bridge or the castle. And there are two members at least of Paris Eternal chasing after him. Muma has Primal. And there's a 5v3 in favor of Houston on the point, and they're attacking, so obviously they have respawn advantage. And, Paris just traces anyway, can't kill him. He pops his Primal, and all the meanwhile, they win the fight on the point. It's just that should not work. And it was just one of those moments where it was so cringeworthy, and it's well, Paris definitely deserved to lose after that performance. But I will say, Houston had a very strong showing, and when it comes to the hero bans coming into play, Hitscan was pretty iffy on Houston. So to see two of the Hitscan heroes out, we got to see a lot of good things from Houston because we felt a lot better about their dive. But now we kind of enter the situation where, well, Dante's basically been solidified as your primary starter. Blaze's looked, I would say,
Blaze looked okay on the Soldier.
Okay, but it's just a matter of when we get back to these hit scan metas, what is Houston going to be doing with their team compositions? Because Houston has always been this team who relied more on their comfort picks, even if they weren't necessarily meta picks. So I'm really anxious to see if Houston is going to try to stay in that wheelhouse, or they're going to try to force the meta, knowing that they've kind of been fighting this uphill battle in that regard. But, I was very pleased to see the Houston turnaround. Probably more so pleased with the Paris turnaround on a day-to-day basis, though. But you had two great showings from these teams just at different times, and I know for a lot of the Houston fans, including yourself, this was a giant sigh of relief, and now they got this month period where they can look at everything going on with the hero pool, seeing how teams fluctuate on that regard. They got more time to study the tapes, but on the opposite end, they're also going into this break once they have started to, gain that sort of momentum where, that could potentially cool them off in this month period.
Yeah, it's good and bad. I agree with you that you get the break is a little bit nice because you get to watch how like the meta's progressing. You get to watch, I think, a couple more teams come out too, because Houston doesn't come back, I think, until April. So Houston's got some time to kind of sit and really get a good read on the meta. And I will like credit to Harsha as well, because it seems like after they finally got that first win, they've been a lot better as far as switching up their comps. I feel good and bad about this. Houston, I would say definitely you're going to be picking. Dante's the one person I think I feel 100% confident with. I don't know if I even go 100% confident. Dante is your carry at this point. I love Linkser, and I always love to see the guy pop off. But like looking at these Dante stats, Dante at the end of the Paris map, Dante had 77 kills, 11 deaths, 31.5k damage, and this was another one that I saw in here. Captain Planet put up a graph earlier about what's it called? It was like fight win rates when this person gets like the first kill. And it was I don't know what the name for that kind of specific stat is, but it was like fight win rates when this person gets a first kill. And there were two people who had 100% for first kills, and it was Corey and it was Dante. So I was happy to see it. I know I was at Guildhall with my girlfriend watching. We were super stoked, but I feel uneasy about it because if there's one thing that Houston really needs, it's momentum, and there's nothing to really cool off your momentum like a month off.
Yeah, I was looking at the schedule just to see, well, when are we actually going to see these other teams that haven't played yet? And, you know, given any rescheduling, it looks like it is week 9, which is the Dallas homestand, and when we finally get to see, you know, the Dynasty, Spark, Hunters, and the Charge.
I was hoping that we were going to get some sort of announcement, because as I'm sure like listeners are aware, we've been seeing not even just general events, but specifically esports events being canceled all around all around the world,
or being held online only.
We did hear the news, not officially from the league, but from the Paris venue, and I think from the Eternal themselves, that Paris is going to be canceling their homestand as well. Granted, I know there's like in Europe they're a lot more strict as far as like number capacity restrictions because of coronavirus stuff, so that's understandable. I'm hoping we get an answer from the league relatively soon, just so we can have an idea, because on one hand, we all understand that we're not going to see Pacific teams for a little bit. It just isn't. We have to keep people safe, and it's a very frustrating situation you can't really blame the league for. But at the same time, you are starting to see people kind of get a little tired of watching these same 6 teams over and over. So here's the hoping. We actually, as we go further into the season, Totem, what would you feel? How would you feel about just making a move to playing a weekend on LANs? I know that it's going to be competitive integrity. There's going to be questions of competitive integrity, but we have to start making up these games at some point.
For me, a LAN is fine. I just don't want to see it get to, like, online only. I feel like that would definitely call into question the competitive integrity more so than just having them sit down and play in a studio or just like a more controlled environment. But we're kind of getting to this point now where, as you mentioned, like fans are starting to get a little bit restless, and a lot of that is kind of because it feels like we're back to like the inaugural season where we're only seeing a handful of teams playing. And, you know, we heard so much hype going into the season about different regions having their own meta and their own, like, distinct way of doing things. And knowing that not all of these teams are scrimming one another, that's left a lot of anticipation kind of, like, up in the air. Like, we want to see what these other teams are doing. Because China is always kind of, beat to their own drum. Where, you know, they're, at least in contenders, like, that was a very McCree-driven meta at times, or they were just hyper aggressive, like what we saw out of the Pacific. So I'm just really anxious to see what these teams are going to do, especially when you consider you have a lot of teams that will get pegged in like the top half of the league, kind of like going into this season, and it's so hard to just kind of understand what the landscape is when there are like 5 or 6 teams that just haven't even taken the stage as of yet, one of them being one of my teams, which makes it that much more devastating at this point. But they're gonna get to it. It's just a matter of when are we gonna get these games played, and when they do schedule them, are they gonna go back to more of a like 4-day schedule where maybe we go back to like Thursday, Friday, Saturday, Sunday, where the makeup games are moved to Thursday and Friday at that point?
I could see them doing it in that sort of LAN environment, and we also know that a lot of those teams are in LA currently.
Mm-hmm.
So they don't have the Blizzard Arena anymore, RIP, but there's plenty of places in LA that you could just run a LAN and have it broadcasted Thursday and Friday. At a certain point, people are going to get mad because it's not the full experience you're going to have with a homestand, but you need to start getting these games going. And we also need to get some utility out of these fantasy picks we made, because I know people who drafted I think Hawkstall was my number one pick, and I got to play him for one game. Like, half of my players are Vancouver Titans players. I didn't get to use them for standard. Like, for standard to have any sort of real competition or value right now, we need to get those games back and going. But from unlimited, at least, we can still pick from players that are still available in the pool.
Right. It's definitely a non-issue with unlimited just because you're actually playing teams or players that are playing every given week. And, I wish we had the updated stats to kind of, get a better gauge of, where we are in the leaderboards on that front, but it looks like High Noon will be updating their stuff tomorrow. But with that being said, unfortunately, Ed's been, kind of killing it in Unlimited, and he's not here tonight, so I can't see how close our lineups are going to be. But before we talk about our picks, here's just a breakdown of the games played this week per team. So teams that played twice this week, we have the Atlanta Reign, London Spitfire, and the Florida Mayhem. And then teams that play once are the New York Excelsior, Philadelphia Fusion, Paris Eternal, Toronto Defiant, Washington Justice, and the Boston Uprising. All right, Ramsey, so looking at this, we have some really close matches based on a team that might only play once. A lot of these matches where, teams are playing twice are you have one okay one and one not so great one looking on paper. So, it's kind of looking through, and it's just man, this is a harder week than what we've seen in the past, knowing that we have seen a lot of swaps, especially on some of these DPS lines going into week 6.
Yeah, and typically you could kind of do the standby of at least for me, I know I used to be on the standby of, all right, well, this person has 2 games. But I think with how teams are kind of shaken up, we could see 2 radically different performances. It's not like you're going to get all right, this guy's going to do 2 solid performances and then I'll just get whichever one's the best. It feels more like you're hoping that you get the good, well, you're going to get the good game out of the good and the rough game for the 2-time teams. But I know when we look at, I don't have my team in the sheet, so I know when I compare the teams that we have, I noticed you've kind of gone with more of the double, except for I think maybe 1 or 2 players. You've still, I think, stuck by the people who play 2 games rule for most of your team.
Yeah, a lot of that is because with Unlimited, it goes based off of the top 3 best maps. And if I'm pulling from, 6 maps as opposed to just the 3, it will typically average out better, but, I basically go off of that, and then I look at the strength of schedule. So, for instance, that Atlanta Reign New York Excelsior match is very enticing from a fantasy perspective. The only downside is, well, we've seen New York basically run 3 different DPS duos throughout this season, and I really don't know what they're going to land on. Because it seems like initially they weren't running a Libero at all. Then we see a swap between Nene and Sabiolbi, and then this past week we saw a little bit of Sabiolbi, but Libero is definitely coming to play with the hero pools. But is Libero going to be the comfort pick moving forward? I'm not confident in that. And you can almost kind of say the same with Atlanta when it comes to their DPS lineup. Obviously, Airster has kind of been the linchpin for that particular team, but it's a matter of, is maybe they going to get the nod on Hitscan, or are they going to continue to play the hot hand in Edison after how he performed on stage this past week against Boston. There's a lot of things that right now are kind of up in the air, but there's definitely some comfort picks that I feel better about, at least how they've been faring on stage. But I'll say, like, when it comes to the supports and the tanks, you definitely have a lot more options in regards to who can net you like the majority of the points. I'm looking at guys like Hawk and Gargoyle have typically fared well. Hanbin has been another one who's performed strongly throughout the season. But, if you're looking at Atlanta, New York, Hoppa is definitely in that discussion as well. And then with supports, it's kind of like up in the air. We've seen a lot of split between main support and flex support in regards to how some of these support players are faring. And, the Philadelphia lineup has been pretty strong outside of that quick 3-0 stomp that they had a couple of weeks ago. But then you have players popping up every now and then, like, Mazah or FD God posting monster numbers for a main support role that have been on par or even outperforming, like, some of the top 5 flex supports. So it's one of those situations where it could honestly be a differential of like 5 to 10 points in many situations on that specific role. And it's so hard to pinpoint who's going to get the upper hand in that regard. And, some weeks it could just boil down to, well, who has the stronger hand in that case? So it's just kind of like up in the air at this point. There's a pretty wide field that you can choose from, and you can feel confident, but every point is going to matter when it comes to, climbing those leaderboards, and a lot of it just could come down to, strength of schedule or, what particular match is more likely to go to a map 5.
Well, let's go through. So you kind of gave some hints to your lineup already, but I think we should just go through and do the comparison. We'll start with tanks. So I know you got Hawk and Gargoyle, which I think honorable considerations to Hotba and Hanbin, like you said. I might be tempted to move Hanbin up there, but I think you're right with just the best 3 maps rule. That I think Hawk and Gargoyle, especially with Gargoyle playing against Boston, I think is going to be your optimal tank lineup. Supports, Dogman and Gangnam Jin, I think, is also really solid. I would probably run. I think I'm going to end up running the same thing. I may end up slotting in Jonak at some point in there. And then, granted, I always have the soft spot for Aim God, and I think Toronto's going to be really rough. The thing with the flex supports now is that before those guys were like the bigger scorers because of how much damage was going on, but now that we've seen so many like runaway Lucios, I really wonder. I wonder if we're going to see a little bit more flex support dominance this weekend.
Yeah, because you're not really getting the same amount of healing through the aura, let alone the same amount of environmental kills. Because that's really been one of the things that's kind of been pushing the Lucio players up in regards to their point totals.
I think Dogman Gangnam Jin is really good. I might slot in Jonak, but I think I'm going to run the same thing. The part where you and I might differ is right. I see you got Xe and Erster with Glister and Yaki as your what's it called, honorary mentions. I think I'd probably run between the 3. I think I'm going to run Xe and Glister with, I hate to say it, but I think I'm going to run Corey as my team captain.
Okay.
Simply because I don't think they're going to be able to dive Corey and hard focus Corey near as much, just because you don't have that Lucio there anymore.
That's a fair point.
And they're going to be running against Toronto, which, again, I think look, it's not like Kelix is really good at any other heroes besides Lucio. Well, his Mercy's all right. But I think Toronto's kind of a team that's in free fall enough to where Washington's like kind of a scrappy enough team to where they'll screw up enough to make it a competitive game.
Right. Yeah,
but
I think in my situation, I'm going to feel a little bit more comfortable running a support as captain. And a lot of that's just because when you look at the overall performances throughout the season so far, and, granted, we're 5 weeks in at this point. Granted, we only have stats for 4 of the 5 at this point. But a lot of it is kind of been dominated by the support. So With Lucio out, I think I'm probably going to favor Jonek as the captain in this case in that match against Atlanta over Atlanta's, 2-game performance this week. But, a lot of solid options. And, Krillin wouldn't be a bad pick either, knowing that he's kind of been, sneaking up there. And London has definitely been performing up to their opponents more so than a lot of people kind of expected. And, that kind of heralds back to, the bet that Ednar and I have about who's going to be the better team between London and Boston. And, I have to say, I'm feeling pretty good right about now about where the team sits in regards to, Boston, probably being ranked 20th at this point by a lot of people out there.
Oh, Ed made a bad bet. No way. I will say I have a bet going with Labosco on my show that if London makes it into the top 10, I owe him a jersey. And I think there's a very real world London could sneak their way in because Glister's ridiculous. Bernard has been playing very well. J-Mac's been so much more solid lately. And now that Krillin's kind of won that starting position, I think this might be one of the best fantasy teams to roll with, simply that they can't stop themselves from playing a map 5. They have to go to map 5 every time.
Yeah, and it's crazy. They're also the only team that has a reverse sweep so far this season. But who would have thought, London kind of took over the Philly role of typically just going to a map 5 anytime they step on stage.
Low floor, high ceiling with this team for sure.
Absolutely. So looking at this week's games, we got some pretty interesting matches. So just going day to day really quick. On Saturday, we have New York Excelsior going up against the Atlanta Reign. That one is definitely going to be a barn burner. We have London Spitfire versus Philadelphia Fusion. Two bruiser teams that constantly go to a map 5, but Phillies looked pretty good, so we'll see how London is going to swing up in that regard. And then we have Paris Eternal versus the home team, that of course being the Florida Mayhem. And by the way, why didn't Washington play that final game on Sunday?
I think because they knew they were going to lose. And I really think that's what it was. They knew they were going to lose, and so at that point, you didn't want to leave your homestand again on that kind of bummer note. That's the only thing I can think of.
I mean, Houston could learn something from that.
Hey, Houston won their last game of the homestand by the skin of our teeth.
Yeah,
so
barely.
Yeah, barely indeed. I'll take it. That was weird. I think that was a general consensus. But it was that it must have been they were concerned they were going to lose.
Absolutely. So. Well, looking at Sunday, we have Toronto Defiant versus the Washington Justice. Two teams that are honestly struggling right now. Then we have London Spitfire versus Atlanta Reign. So very tough week for London in regards to game prep in that regard. And then we close out with Boston Uprising versus the Florida Mayhem. So, some pretty intriguing matches. I think the marquee one, though, is definitely that Saturday opener between the New York Excelsior and the Atlanta Reign. We kind of talked about how if Atlanta doesn't have a good read on their opponent, that they definitely seem to struggle. And, they've looked really good at times, where they look clean. They've run some off-kilter stuff. They like to rely on the Torb for the anti-dive. And then we saw, Edison come into play. Their hit scan has looked fairly well. Their support line has probably been the best lineup for them throughout the season so far. But then you have New York, who, for the most part have played very consistently and kind of going in, they seem to have synergize a bit better, knowing that they know who their tank lineup is, they know who their support lineup is, whereas Atlanta has kind of been swapping things up here and there. So, Atlanta is kind of hard to read at this given time, so I don't know whether or not I would give them the advantage in this particular series, but out of all of the series, I feel like this one is probably going to be the closest out of the lot in regards to this current weekend.
I'm right there with you. If you had to pick a winner, though, who do you think?
I'm more confident right now in New York. I do want to see a Libero versus Edison like flex DPS off though, if anything. But I think New York will win, and a lot of it boils down to the fact that a lot of the teams that have been going up against them have just not been capitalizing on the pressure on the front line. The New York Excelsior support duo has been keeping Mono alive, and they just seem to be doing a better job of protecting like their overall tanks compared to a vast majority of the other teams in the league. So I'm gonna give them the edge, not only on the front line but also on the supports as well.
I'm right there with you. I think Atlanta is really, really going to want to uphold the record they've been having with New York, but I think New York sees this as the time to really put their foot down and just squash any hope Atlanta has.
So moving into the next matchup we're going to talk about, we have the Paris Eternal versus the Florida Mayhem. So Mayhem on paper have one tougher match and one soft match. I'm pretty sure everyone knows how this one is going to unfold. But Paris, we've seen both sides of the coin at this point. Is having the Xe back on McCree and then Nico back on May enough to solidify a Paris win for you this week?
I think so. I think that the Xe McCree is such a hard carry hero, and Hanbin can play pretty much anything. I want to get your thoughts on this, Totem, because I've heard a lot of different opinions. How much do we like Karayan as the main tank for the Florida Mayhem?
Because I've heard talking on an overall basis, or specifically, are we talking Reinhardt?
Reinhardt, because he's not going to be playing anything else this weekend.
Karayan is very reactive, and I prefer his playstyle over the Reinhardt that we have seen from Fate. Anything outside of that, I do feel like Fate pulls ahead further and further, but knowing what the hero pool is, Karayan is definitely the pick in my mind.
Gotcha. Because I've been talking with people who don't like his playstyle and find it too passive, and I've talked to people who really enjoy his kind of, he can get some of those clutch earth shatters. So I've been curious. I think that when you go into a team that can be as aggressive as Paris, because that kind of gets lost a little bit, that Paris is a hyper aggressive team and they want to be. I think Paris is going to just push too far into them to where they can't, where Florida's going to have a hard time managing it. I don't necessarily think Florida's going to be that restricted by hero pools, but I wonder what we're going to see out of FD God this weekend. I wonder how that game's going to go.
I would imagine we'll see quite a bit of Baptiste, maybe Zenyatta as the DPS duo. I don't know. It's kind of hard to say. We've seen so many different iterations, or we could just see Anna coming into the fold.
We know FD God does have a Baptiste pick as well, so I think he could do it. So I think I'm going to go with Paris on this one. Where do you think?
Yeah, I'm pretty confident in Paris. And just getting back to the whole Karayan discussion, a lot of teams take the approach of, at least the ones that are playing more passively, just looking to get that first pick from the McCree. So in this case, they're going to be relying a lot on Saya player to find that first pick. And if they don't get it, then they're probably just going to buckle underneath the pressure that Paris will put on him on that front. But, I would imagine this is either going to be a 3-0 or a 3-1 in favor of the Eternal. And, I feel a lot more confident in Mayhem in their other series, which we'll talk about here in just a moment.
I agree.
So, moving on to Sunday, we have a very intriguing matchup between the Toronto Defiance and the Washington Justice. So Defiance relying fairly heavily on the dive compositions throughout the season. Gonna be a lot harder to pull that off given the Week 6 hero bans. And then you have Washington who, going into the season, a lot of people felt like they were gonna ride the wave of momentum that they had based off of how they performed in Stage 4 with the introduction of 2-2-2. we've seen Stratus and Corey definitely play pretty well. Roar's been, I would say, better than anticipated, knowing that we didn't get the tank duo that we were expecting due to the visa issues with Lulsish. But, in the grand scheme of things, Washington has kind of buckled under the pressure throughout this season. And I don't feel like their record necessarily translates to the skill that that particular team has. And it's very frustrating knowing that this is a team that potentially does have like that top 8 potential. And right now they're just kind of lost in the shuffle. But at least in this case, Toronto has definitely had their own fair share of struggles throughout the season. So I feel like when you're talking about building momentum, like this is like a perfect storm for both sides. Whoever is going to come out ahead on this one is probably going to be able to start to turn their season around, while the other one is probably going to continue that free fall. And, given the performances that we've seen on the DPS side, I don't think that Toronto is going to put up too much of a fight, knowing that we're going to see a lot of, Stratus on the mate. Corey can just pop off on Widow. I don't think Toronto can match him in that regard.
I have to agree. I think that I hope this is the week that Washington finally learns that, hey, if we just dump all of our healing into Corey, he will win fights for us. I don't know if you saw, there's that breakdown that I think Sideshow and Bren did of like Corey fighting against, I think it was London, where like they should have won that game 3 or 4 times, but Corey's like at 15 health for like a solid 10 seconds, getting like 3 kills in a row. So I think Washington takes it. I don't think it'll be that close realistically, unless Surefour is really having a good day.
Well, those have come pretty few and far between so far this season.
He's trying his best. It's unfortunate when you have to try and carry. We have to carry Agilities and Beast behind you.
Mm-hmm.
I don't know. They're good players. It's been a little frustrating just to see that the indecisiveness a little bit from the team.
Yeah, and a lot of that could just boil down to the fact that maybe they don't have necessarily like go-to shot caller, but I would say they haven't necessarily measured up to the sum of their parts still at this point. So hopefully sooner rather than later, Toronto will be able to get their feet underneath them and really start to flourish. But, right now, Washington's looked just a little bit more consistent in that regard. So, outside of that, the other home match that we have for Florida is against Boston. So Jerry, he's done good things against bad teams, not so good things against the great teams. And here we have Boston going up against Florida, who have kind of been more middle of the pack. So I don't know if that means we're going to get like average Jerry, popping off Jerry, lackluster Jerry. There are so many different Jerrys out there. I don't know quite what to expect, but knowing that Fusions is going to be back on main tank, probably playing the Reinhardt, just that alone, like, I would not favor him over Karayan. Maybe if Fate was in, like, it would be more even in that regard. But, at the end of the day, Boston has not looked that great. Their support line has probably been the highlight, but there's just been too many times where Color Hex kind of just goes out with a whimper. And I feel like in order for this team to really pop off, it just can't be the Jerry show. They need to have equal contribution across their different lines, and we just haven't quite seen that yet. They seem to put everything in the Jerry basket, and if Jerry's popping off, sure, they're going to put up a hell of a fight, but are they going to win the match? Probably not.
Probably not.
Florida probably going to walk out with a win in this case to at least send the crowd home happy, but they'll ultimately, walk out 1-1 when all is said and done here.
I think Florida takes it too. I don't see so far where Boston's really going to be able to keep up, especially because you don't have that depth anymore on your bench, right? Like, you have to run Fusion. You have to run Jerry and Keller Hex. You have, like, Bruson's still somewhere. I don't know where Bruson is, but Bruson's still there. And like Muffin's done all right for the team, I think. He's done the best that he can. It's unfortunate to be put in that kind of situation. Halo's looked all right, and Mienbon looks good. So I think Florida takes it, maybe 3-1.
Well, we know that Boston hasn't been afraid to make sign-ins. Knowing that they only have 2 DPS, what do you feel like is the likelihood that they will go out even before mid-season to sign a new DPS player?
I do think they're going to pick somebody up. I don't know who, though, because it feels like... So it seemed like last year and the year before, Huck had all these pickups. Like, we knew that Huck was really good about picking up people from, like, little played regions or, like, kind of diamonds in the rough players who weren't really looked up on a lot of teams. And this year, it didn't really seem like that, if I'm being honest. It felt like... Well, I go back and forth because... nobody knew who the heck Jerry was. Nobody knew. Like, people were kind of familiar with Bruson from Angry Titans.
Mm-hmm.
People really liked Mienbon, but they were surprised that Boston were able to get him. And I know people like Halo from his time on Triumph. So if I remember correctly on the traditional Boston timeline, this is about the point of the season where they go and trade for like a journeyman, like mid-level DPS, a stellar, if you will, or like, you know, Mangachu. That's it. That's who they're going to go get. Who's a journeyman DPS who's looked all right everywhere else and who will have one really good week with Boston and then immediately fall back to the obscure.
You think Boston is going to try to hoard some of the former OWL talent from Talon? I don't know.
Well, I mean, now that Boston has sent, I think, they've only sent one person to be part of the new Lucky Future team, right? So that, like, I'm trying to think of who they could pick up, but I think they'll definitely pick up somebody. I just don't know who.
Well, we know it won't be Munchkin.
It probably won't, unless Munchkin unretires. Well, he didn't retire, but I mean, like...
Well, I mean, he moved to Lucky Future.
Yeah, that was the best, was watching people's tweets be like, man, congrats to Munchkin for finding a way to get on a better team than the Boston Uprising.
That's definitely pretty rough in that regard. So, you know, outside of that, you know, I'm just trying to think of, you know, maybe some players that we haven't quite seen debut yet that we haven't seen. But, you know, I think at this point we've basically seen all of the starters. You know, it's hard to imagine Sharp getting any play time after how Edison and Baby Bay have performed so far with Atlanta.
I have an idea. Okay. He's not playing competitively right now, but what if they went and got Davin?
Formerly
I just want
Team
Davin and
Gigante.
Owl, man. That's all I want. I want Davin and Owl. I know Asking's back on Clockwork Vendetta, but I know he's kind of had a pretty tumultuous 6 months, but asking somebody who's been wanting the league for a while, and if it depends on who you're trying to replace, because if you're trying to upgrade the flex DPS where Color Hex is, then I think you look at a completely different pool of people. But there's definitely a lot of jilted hit scan players who want a shot.
Absolutely, and you know, like, will this be the week that we see Chipsa come in against London?
Oh, dude, if it wasn't last week when they were playing against Boston, I don't think they put Chipsa in. Legit, when they were like, let's play the weakest team in the league and like steamroll them, and they didn't put Chipsa in. Like, I'm pretty sure Chips is not even in the Western Hemisphere, let alone Philadelphia.
Well, Chipsa Watch will continue going into further weeks ahead. So, you know, I think that pretty much covers everything that we typically cover for the week, Ramses. So, you know, let's go ahead and close out the show for tonight. So if guys want to help us out, obviously the best thing to do is to head over to iTunes and leave us a review. It's, you know, been a little while since we've actually gotten one there, but we're always looking for feedback and constructive criticism in order to, you know, just provide insight for how we can make for a better listen-in experience for you guys. And just a quick note, I did finally get around to doing a weekly recall from, you know, that prior week, so I actually did 2 weeks worth of podcast listens in that regard. So, of course, if you're looking for Overwatch content, we have Overwatch Recall on our website, and then every Sunday we do the episodic listens of basically all the content released in that week. So to keep up to date with all of the podcast news on that front, you can follow Overwatch Recall on Twitter at OWRecall, and hopefully I'll get some interviews scheduled here shortly.
Well, hey, now that Jake and Avast have podcasts, we have to add them to the actual review too.
This is true. Like, they had a new show started. Has it started, or was it started next week?
I think the Jake one has started already. The Avast one, I think, is starting next week, which I love Avast, but if it's going to be him and Jane talking about Overwatch League for a half, I might need to just look at the highlight of it.
I will say this, too. I will wait with a bated breath, because there's been a number of times where pro players start a podcast and then stop doing it within either the first week or the first month. So,
like Dogman's podcast?
We'll see on that front. Yeah. I'm on a few others. So, of course, outside of that, if you're looking to support the network, you can do so a couple of different ways. Throw your Twitch Prime subs our way. We do stream 3 times a week in regards to our network shows. And if that's too much for you and you have, a little bit of spare change laying around, you can pledge to us on Patreon, where we have tiers starting at just $1 a month. So you can find more info at patreon.com/OWL Network, where you too can join the likes of our master and above patrons, Daniel, Owl, Kesha, Agent Life, and 044 in helping our network grow. And of course, guys, every little bit goes towards, podcast costs in regards to the hosting, which definitely, can get up there, given the fact that, we do have like 4 or 5 podcasts at this point. Now, of course, Ramses, we do have so many different ways how our listeners can get a hold of us. So why don't you go ahead and let them know how they can contact our show?
So if you want to write us a long form message, you can hit us up on our email at contact@owlandshow.com. On Twitter, we have the handle @OwlByTheNumbers if you want to banter with us there. The website officially is www.owlandshow.com, and all of our our YouTube content is directly available at youtube.com/C/Overwatch League Network, where I know Spider's been putting up some cool stuff with Null Sector. I know that we have all the bits from the episodes as well there, so definitely some content for you to see there. Discord, come be a part of our community. We have like mini discussions going on during the games each weekend, on Saturdays and Sundays, which is really fun. Get to hang out. I know Ed and Totem are usually in there pretty consistently, so is Booger. I pop in there occasionally to complain about the Outlaws, so that's a good time. And there's so much stuff in there, like so many good people that I've gotten to hang out with and play games with. And of course, if you are watching this right now live, you already know, but you can watch this show live at twitch.tv/owlandshow. And we do Overwatch League by the numbers on Tuesdays. And I know the schedule's a little different because Ed's gone, but I know you guys do Overwatch League Network on Mondays at 6 p.m. Central Time, correct?
Well, we do Overwatch League Network at 7 p.m. Pacific Time. That's actually going to be airing tomorrow night after Heroes Never Die. So we'll have a twofer tomorrow.
Yes. So typically, Overwatch League Network is Mondays at 7 p.m. Pacific Time, but this week it's going to be after Heroes Never Die, which is 5 p.m. on Wednesdays at Pacific Time. That's the Variety Overwatch podcast, and which of course, like we've talked about enough. I want to congratulate you guys again. Just past 200 episodes pretty recently, which is a huge feat.
Yep, that was this past Monday.
Yes, sir. Just to think about the amount of hours you guys have, I'm wondering if we took like if we graphed it, like if we took the entire statistical ranking, we can make a pie chart of how much of it is like you guys on topic versus off topic.
I feel like that split would be like 90 to 8.
I feel like it's a 60-40, like 60 off, 40 on. Like it depends. It depends. But if you follow us on Twitch, it helps us out a lot. We are a Twitch affiliate, so when you subscribe to the show and subscribe to the channel, you can earn our network emoticon. And we just invite you always to check out the shows we have each week. Plenty of awesome content for you to get invested in.
Absolutely. And, you know, in regards to contacting our host, you can find Edinar on Twitter, at Edinar Overwatch. I don't even have his stuff on here.
It is Edinar Overwatch, yes.
And then Boomer Bob can be found on Twitter at BLAZZIN_BOB. And happy belated birthday to Bob. That's why he wasn't here this past week.
Go send Bob a happy birthday tweet, guys. He'll definitely enjoy it.
Yes, even though it's a week late, but he will appreciate it nonetheless. As for myself, you can find me on Twitter at TotallyDrunkCTR. When I do stream, that is on Twitch at twitch.tv/TotallyDrunk. But Ramses, how can our listeners get a hold of you?
You can find me on Twitter at Ramses_OW. You can find the other show I do at PushPointPod. And Ed and I had to push back our battle between our two other podcasts because I'm a dunce and I forgot that I wasn't even going to be home this week. So we'll be doing that next week on Thursday, where we're going to be facing off in some Apex Legends 3v3s and some Overwatch 3v3s. You never realize, Totem, I never realized how badly I am spoiled by playing Reinhardt and Winston until I have to play an actual shooting game where I can't just jump horizontally a couple times with a giant shield or with a tickle lightning gun. So I'm trying to improve in time where we can put on a good enough show, but we'll have more details for that next week. But I think it would be remiss, Totem. We have to do a random question of the week. And since you typically never get to ask the questions, typically it's Ed, I think you should be the one to come up with a question of the week this week.
Oh, goodness. I'm just trying to think of what we should actually talk about. Okay, well, let's do one that is probably a topic that you probably be familiar with. Let's do Ninja Turtles, okay?
Of course.
Okay. I'm trying to think of which character I should revolve this around.
See, I found out this week that the Fugitoid was actually the character that Eastman and Laird made that failed, and then they just shoved it back into the Ninja Turtles again.
There you go. Okay, so here's one. So what is the one ingredient that the Turtles do not like on their pizza? And this is more so Michelangelo is definitely at the forefront of this.
That Mikey doesn't like?
Yes.
It feels like anchovies is the easy answer.
Yeah.
But it can't be anchovies. Is it an actual pizza topping that most people would have, or that is not like crazy to have on a pizza, or is it something ridiculous?
That's something that some people like.
It's pineapple, isn't it?
No.
Oh.
Well, you know, the thing is, Ramsey, sometimes you just need to trust your gut reaction.
So it is anchovies.
It is
okay.
anchovies.
Okay. I'm telling you, it's the number one. It was the number one grossing indie movie for forever because of how strong this material is, guys.
Mm-hmm.
Oh man. But yeah, I don't like anchovies on my pizza either, and I think it's pretty hard to find in most places anyway. So I think they're onto something.
Absolutely. So, you know, with that being said, guys, that will do it for us here tonight on OWL by the Numbers. This has been episode number 42. I've been your host, Totally Drunk, joined this week by my co-host Ramses, and we hope to see you guys back tomorrow night for, you know, 2 new podcast episodes between Overwatch League Network as well as Heroes Never Die. You guys take care and have a good night.
We'll see you soon.